Hello everyone, the topic of this video was suggested from one of my viewers, and that's super exciting because as much as I love just putting out what I'm thinking about and things I find interesting and helpful, I would really love to start putting out more content that is useful to you. So if you have a question or maybe a topic you'd like me to consider in one of my videos, please let me know. Even if it's not something I know a lot on at that moment, I'm more than happy to research it and look into it because then I'll have learned something new myself. So the topic for today's video is overcoming psychological barriers. And a few things I want to just quickly get out of the way before we get started is the first thing is I'm not a psychologist. I have no professional experience in psychology. My only experience is in listening to a few psychology lectures via YouTube and reading some books written by psychologists. Secondly, I want to talk, so I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my barriers and how I went about overcoming it. But I just want to stress that what worked for me won't necessarily work for you, but it can start as a good starting point for you. So the purpose of this video is really for me to just detail the actual barrier, how I went about overcoming it, and some thoughts on that. To one, show you that it is possible, and then secondly, to show you something that you can use to start off your journey in overcoming some of your barriers. So the first thing I want to talk about is my universal approach to being successful at anything. I've used this not only in my physical training, I used this in some of my previous jobs. I apply this to basically anything that I do that I want to get better at. And there's 3 steps to it. The first thing is initiate. And that just means you have to start. So step 1, do. And then the second step is adapt. And once we've started to do something, we can start to analyze it. What's working? What isn't working? Are we getting the desired outcome? And then we can start to adapt what it is we're doing to start doing better. And then the final step is overload. So once we've got a system or a strategy in place or a training regime or an eating routine, whatever it is, and we've started it and then we've got it working really well for us, then we start to overload it. So we increase the intensity, increase the duration, we start doing more. And that's ultimately, I believe, the 3 surefire steps to be successful at anything. Do better, do more. So what barrier did I overcome? So I'm going to say there were sort of 2 main factors in it. One was a fear of failure, which I think is a really big understatement, actually. It was a severe aversion to slash hatred of failure. Picture Gollum from Lord of the Rings when they put that little bit of elven rope on him and he's screaming about how it burns. I really did not like failure. And secondly, and I'm not sure which one came first, but they did sort of play into each other and then compound, was I was really low on self-confidence. So I didn't believe that I could succeed in many things. So they both came together and I didn't want to fail. And I was convinced that almost anything I did do was going to be in failure. So I did very little. There was like a very narrow band that I operated in. So there were all these opportunities I missed out on. There were jobs I didn't apply for. There were promotions I didn't apply for. There were cool experiences I didn't put myself in a position to take advantage of. There were girls I was interested in who could have been interested in me, but I didn't want to ask them because I didn't want them to say no. So basically, there was this very little box, and that's where I lived. One particular example I can remember at work, they taught us a new program and it was really powerful and there was going to be lots of potential for me to really take my work to the next level. And as soon as I hit my first difficulty with it, and it wasn't even an insurmountable problem, as soon as I hit the first little road bump, I just got off the road. I parked the car, I got out, got into the old program, and I never looked back. So that was a huge barrier for me, was just major fear of failing and really, really low self-confidence. So how did I go about overcoming that? And I've got 4 steps to this. And at the time, I didn't go into it saying, well, here are the 4 steps I'm going to take and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and this is what's going to happen. I can only really make sense of it looking back sort of with the benefit of hindsight and being able to see, oh, so that's what I was doing. And the first step is to understand the barrier. And what sort of prompted me to start really digging deep into the source of the barrier was people were asking me questions about, well, why do you do that? Or why don't you do that? Why do you feel that way? And I honestly couldn't really give them a good answer. And I pride myself on being a relatively clever person. And I was like, well, if I can't answer these questions, then what the heck? So I had to start asking myself these questions and really digging deeper. Well, when did I start to feel this way? Have I always been this way? Was there a point in my life that I could remember where I wasn't afraid of trying new things, where I wasn't afraid of failing, where I was confident, where I was willing to go out and do things? Could I remember specific events that led to this, or a big event that, caused me to feel something so strongly that I could remember it years down the line? And then I started looking at it from different perspectives. At this I came to the realization on my own that a lot of what I was feeling was emotional, and that's not to say it was wrong or bad, but it wasn't very logical. So then I started to really get logical, almost like a Dr. Spock from Star Trek in a way, by pointing out all the little logical inconsistencies in what I was thinking. And then once I sort of understood some of the causes behind my barrier, I started to reverse engineer solutions. So once I had a good idea on how I built that, I was like, well, now I can have a good idea on how I'm going to tear that down. So I started to implement little things that were going to make overcoming that barrier easier. A couple that are just coming to my mind. I often, when I'd get all worked up about fearing of failure, one of the things I'd often say is, well, what if this goes wrong, or what if this happens? And I'd picture some of the most catastrophic outcomes. Seriously, my imagination was crazy, and my mind would just go to all these wild places on this, how this one little event, this one little mistake would just spiral out of control and my whole life would be ruined. And I was like, well, Rob, that's just a little bit crazy. How about we start picturing all the really cool ways this could go right, all the very exciting things that will happen? And a specific of that, when I was training for my big race in Sweden, one thing I like to do was just to picture if I were to get interviewed at the finish line after successfully completing the race, what are some of the things I would say? Who would I like to thank? What sort of witty, funny things would I like to say? And in the end, I did actually get interviewed at the end of the race. I haven't actually seen the footage air anywhere, which is a massive relief to me because I was not on planet Earth at that stage. I'd been up for nearly 30 hours and my mind was in not a particularly good place. Some other things I used as solutions was I noticed especially at the gym, when my trainer would say, what, do you want to go up to 80 kilograms on this? I would ask her, can I? Or I'd be like, oh, I don't know if I can. So I came up with a rule that there were no questions, there was only doing. And that would be the answer to the question. I was like, because it didn't really make sense to answer a question on can I do it if I haven't at least attempted it first. And another thing I also came up with my exercise professional was if she gave me a choice of how long or how heavy, that was a waste of time because I was always going to pick the heaviest and give that a go first and then see what happened there. So once I understood, I then started to sort of undo the work, and then I got help, and that could have been a friend, family, colleague, boss, mentor, trainer, coach, basically someone you can trust and say, you don't have to share all the details because some of them could be quite personal, but you can go to them and say, I'm working on overcoming this, and this is how you can help me. Can you please help me? And if it's someone you trust and it's someone you have a relationship with, chances are they're going to be more than willing to help. And it could just be, you say, I have this problem with confidence. Can you always make sure that before we attempt something new, that you remind me of all the times I've been successful, and just give you that little sort of boost of momentum, that little pep talk, go get him, Tiger. And then the final step is repetition, repetition. And I realized pretty early on that these barriers took time to build. They're therefore going to take time to tear them down. So don't give up straight away. Understand that this whole thing is a process. And sometimes your progress isn't going to be a nice, a linear line. Sometimes there's going to be up. Sometimes there's going to be down. Sometimes you might even go backwards a little bit. But it's really important to stick with it. And that's also where getting the help can come into it, that these people can make sure that you stay on track and can come in and support you when you do hit those rough patches. And I just want to jump back quickly. One specific little bit of the solutions I use that jumped into my mind reminded me from this quote here that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I'd become so fixated on sort of whether the shot hit or whether it missed that was all I could think of. So because I didn't want the shot to miss, I just stopped taking shots. And then I started to condition myself that the successful outcome for me, initially, this was sort of a stepping stone, that I viewed taking a shot as a success. Even if it missed by a long way, that was still a victory for me because I'd taken the shot. And I've sort of figured instinctually that the more shots I take, the better I'm going to be at taking shots. So just to wrap that up, the four, and they're not necessarily steps because they kind of all flow in together and the order might be different. So to overcoming any barrier is we have to understand how that barrier originated, how it was built, what caused it. And then once we know that, we flip that to reverse engineer a way to take it down. And then we get help. Whether that's professional or otherwise, it's basically someone that we trust who can help us take down that barrier, and then we just chip away at it. We keep at it. So there you go. That's at least how I overcame my psychological barriers.